A world that praises beauty often forgets the value of kindness. It's something we see every day, whether we notice it or not. From the moment we open our eyes in the morning and scroll through our phones, we're surrounded by images of perfection, flawless faces, perfect smiles, stylish clothes. The message is clear. Beauty is everything. But what happens when someone doesn't fit that mold? What happens when someone walks through the world and is seen not for who they are inside, but for how different they look on the outside? Growing up in a place that values appearances more than intentions can shape the way we see ourselves and others. It teaches us, without even saying it out loud, that if we don't meet the standards of beauty, we're somehow less deserving, less capable, less welcome. That quiet message sneaks in through the way people glance or avoid glancing, through silence that feels heavier than words, through laughter that comes from corners behind backs, whispered but sharp. And in all of that noise, kindness becomes harder to hear. But here's the truth. When we look at someone and judge them by what we see in a single glance, we miss everything that matters. We miss the moments of quiet bravery, the generosity that doesn't shout, the heart that wants nothing more than to be seen and to give love. Kindness doesn't live in smooth skin or symmetrical features. It lives in gestures, in the way someone listens when you speak, in the way they offer their last piece of bread without a word. It lives in patience, in forgiveness, in standing beside someone even when everyone else walks away. Too often, people walk past the most beautiful souls because those souls are wrapped in what society calls imperfection. They carry a story in their eyes that no one takes the time to read. And yet they continue to give, to help, to love, not because it's easy, not because they expect something back, but because that's who they are, because kindness for them isn't an act, it's a way of being. And while the world is busy choosing favorites based on appearances, the ones who are overlooked build strength in silence. They learn how to survive without applause, how to hold themselves up when there's no hand reaching out. They discover that even when no one sees them, they can still see others, and choose to be kind anyway. That takes more courage than most of us will ever understand. There's something deeply powerful about someone who chooses kindness in a world that hasn't been kind to them, who offers warmth despite the cold they've received, who forgives even when they've been hurt. That kind of heart shines brighter than any smile filtered through a lens. And maybe that's the lesson we all need. Maybe it's time we stop celebrating only what we can see and start honoring what we can feel. Maybe it's time to pause before we react, to ask ourselves what story we're missing behind a face we don't understand. Because if we only love what is easy to love, if we only value what looks good, then we've missed the point of love entirely. True connection doesn't come from appearance. It comes from presence, from compassion, from choosing to see people not just with our eyes, but with our hearts. It's not always the loudest, brightest, or most polished person who has the most to give. Often, it's the one sitting quietly in the corner, the one who has learned to carry their pain with grace, who will be the first to step up when someone else falls. So let us not forget, beauty may catch the eye, but kindness captures the soul. And in the end, it's not how someone looks that stays with us. It's how they made us feel, whether they stood beside us when we felt alone, whether they chose to speak softly when others were shouting, whether they reminded us in 1,000 quiet ways that we mattered. And maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't need more beautiful faces. It needs more beautiful hearts. Judgments are made in seconds. Hearts are understood in time. That's something I've come to understand deeply, not just in thought, but through experience. It's strange how quickly we form opinions, isn't it? A glance, a gesture, a tone of voice, and suddenly our minds decide who someone is, what they're worth, and whether or not they belong. All in just a few seconds. We don't mean to do it most of the time. It's automatic, like breathing, but that doesn't make it right, because those first impressions are rarely the whole truth. When someone walks into a room and people turn away, it isn't always because of something they've done. Sometimes it's because they look different. Maybe their clothes don't match the latest trend. Maybe their face tells a story that others don't want to hear. Maybe they don't speak with the same rhythm or carry the same confidence. But before a word is even spoken, they've already been measured and dismissed, and that's the painful part. We forget that everyone has a story. We forget that behind every face is a life, full of moments we'll never see unless we choose to look deeper. We miss the late nights they've stayed awake wondering why they're not enough. We miss the mornings they've had to build courage just to step outside. We don't see the kindness they carry, the love they give freely even when they've received none in return. But time reveals what the eyes can't. Time shows us that what we assumed in seconds was far from the truth. When we slow down, when we listen instead of judge, we begin to notice things. The gentle way someone comforts a stranger. The honesty in their silence, the way their words carry weight not because they're loud, but because they're real. And slowly the walls we built from assumption begin to fall. There's a certain beauty in discovering someone's heart. It's not loud or dramatic, it's quiet, patient. Sometimes it's in a shared laugh after weeks of distance. Sometimes it's in a single sentence that shows you who they are. It doesn't rush, it doesn't try to impress. It just waits to be seen, to be felt, to be known. And I've learned that those we judge the fastest are often the ones who end up teaching us the most. The ones we look past are often the ones we later look up to, because their strength was never in their appearance or their charm. It was in how they chose to show up every day in a world that didn't understand them. It's not easy to carry a misunderstood heart, to be looked at but never truly seen, to be spoken to but never truly heard. It takes a kind of quiet courage to keep being kind when people expect nothing from you, but that's what makes such hearts rare and powerful. So maybe what we need is to pause before we label, to resist the urge to fit people into boxes they never asked to be placed in. Maybe we need to sit with someone long enough to hear the rhythm of their story. Maybe we need to let go of certainty and embrace curiosity instead, because when we judge too quickly, we miss out. We miss the chance to build friendships we never imagined. We miss the wisdom that comes from different walks of life. We miss the beauty that can't be captured in a first impression. But when we stay, when we listen, when we allow time to reveal the heart, we begin to understand. We begin to see not just who someone appears to be, but who they truly are. And in that understanding, something shifts, compassion grows, connection forms, respect replaces assumptions. We stop walking past people and start walking with them. And suddenly the world feels a little less divided, a little more human. So the next time we're tempted to decide who someone is within seconds, maybe we can remind ourselves, the heart isn't understood in a moment. It takes time, but it's always worth the wait. Every scar has a story, every silence a storm. It's easy to overlook what we don't understand. When we see someone who walks a little differently, speaks with hesitation, or sits alone in a room full of noise, we often move on without a second thought. We tell ourselves they're just quiet, strange, or maybe unfriendly. But what we don't realize is that what we see is only the surface. What lies underneath is far more complex, far more human. Scars don't always show on the skin. Some are invisible, hidden beneath steady voices and practiced smiles. They come from moments that leave marks no one else can see. moments of loss, of rejection, of being told over and over again that you don't belong. And when someone carries those kinds of scars, they learn to walk through life carefully. They learn to speak less because speaking has sometimes brought more pain than peace. They learn to expect little because expecting too much has only led to disappointment. And yet, within that silence is strength, a kind of strength that doesn't shout. It holds itself together when everything feels like it's falling apart. It stays soft in a world that has been unkind. But that silence, the one so many misread as weakness, is full of emotion. It holds the echoes of words unspoken, tears that had no safe place to fall, thoughts that couldn't be shared because they wouldn't be understood. That silence is a storm, quietly raging behind tired eyes, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice. It's strange how society teaches us to fear what we don't understand, to avoid what makes us uncomfortable. But what if we looked closer? What if, instead of backing away from the quiet one in the room, we sat beside them? What if we asked, not with words, but with presence, "Are you okay?" What if we gave them time, not to explain, but to be? Because behind that quiet demeanor might be someone who's endured more than we'll ever know, someone who's learned to survive with grace, someone whose story deserves to be heard, even if it takes a while to tell. Scars, too, tell stories, stories of battles fought, of pain endured, and of healing in progress. They don't need to be covered up or ignored. They're proof of survival, proof that despite everything, a person kept going. And that's not something to pity, that's something to honor. Some of the most compassionate hearts are born from the deepest wounds, not because suffering is beautiful, but because it teaches empathy. It opens the heart to the pain of others. It shows someone what it feels like to be unseen, unheard, and unloved. It makes them determined never to let another person feel the same way. So when we meet someone who doesn't speak much, who keeps their distance, or who seems guarded, maybe instead of assuming they're cold or strange, we can remember every silence has its reason, every scar has its roots. And maybe that person is not trying to be difficult. They're trying to protect what's left of themselves. Maybe they're still learning to trust again. Maybe the storm inside them is finally calming, and all they need is a little space, a little kindness, and a little time. What a gift it would be if we started seeing people for more than what they appear to be. If we stopped asking, what's wrong with them, and started wondering, what have they been through? Because that shift changes everything. It moves us from judgment to compassion, from distance to connection. It reminds us that people are not problems to fix, but stories to listen to. And those stories, no matter how quiet, always matter. The world would be softer if we approached each other with gentleness, if we treated every scar not with shame, but with respect, if we welcomed silence as something sacred, not something broken, because sometimes the ones who say the least have the most to offer. Sometimes their silence is holding more wisdom than 1,000 loud voices. And when they choose to speak, when they finally feel safe enough to share even a piece of their story, we must listen, not with impatience, but with care. Because what they're offering isn't just words, it's trust. So let's be the kind of people who see beyond appearances, who recognize that scars are not flaws, but reminders of endurance, who understand that silence is not emptiness, it's depth. And in that understanding, let's begin to build a world that doesn't just see the storm, but offers shelter from it. Sometimes the most ignored soul carries the brightest light. It's a quiet truth, one that often goes unnoticed in the rush of our everyday lives. In a world where voices compete to be the loudest, where presence is measured by attention, and worth is often equated with visibility, those who live in the background are so easily overlooked. They pass by like shadows, noticed, uncelebrated, and too often misunderstood. But if we stop for a moment, if we truly open our eyes, we begin to see that those very souls we ignore are often the ones holding something extraordinary. There's something special about those who are used to being unseen. They watch more than they speak. They listen deeply. They feel things that others might miss. And in their quietness, they learn to understand people not by what they say, but by what they don't say. They notice the tremble in a voice, the pause in a sentence, the weariness behind a smile. They carry a kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books or lectures. It comes from observation, reflection, and resilience. People like that don't need the spotlight to shine. They shine in the smallest acts, in how they hold space for others without asking for anything in return, in how they offer help not for recognition, but simply because it's needed, in how they carry their pain without bitterness and still manage to offer kindness to others. That kind of light doesn't flash or flare. It glows steadily, even in the darkest corners. The tragedy is that we often miss it. We walk past the quiet student in the back of the classroom. We overlook the soft, spoken coworker. We dismiss the one who doesn't speak unless spoken to. We assume that silence means emptiness, that solitude means weakness. But that's not the truth. Sometimes silence is where strength lives. Sometimes solitude is where purpose is born. And sometimes the most ignored soul is the one whose light has been quietly keeping others warm. What's more powerful than someone who chooses goodness even when they've received so little of it themselves? What's more beautiful than someone who offers light when they've only known shadows? These people, these quiet, overlooked souls, are often the ones holding the entire room together without anyone realizing it. They are the ones who remember the birthdays others forget, who notice when someone's mood changes, who give their time, energy, and care without ever needing to be thanked. And though they may not be recognized, they are the ones who make the world a softer, safer place. But it's not easy to be that person. It's not easy to be ignored again and again, and still find the strength to show up with kindness. It takes courage to continue being light in a world that doesn't always see you. It takes faith to believe that your value isn't defined by applause or attention. It takes heart to keep loving when your love is often returned with silence. That's why it's so important for us to look beyond the obvious, to not just hear who speaks the loudest, but to seek out those who speak gently, to not only celebrate the ones in the center of the room, but to honor those holding things together quietly in the corner, because everyone has a story. Everyone carries something we cannot see. And if we only focus on what's visible, we'll miss the light that's been there all along, steady, strong, and ready to shine if only someone took the time to notice. What kind of world would we create if we learned to see people like that? If we didn't measure worth by popularity or presence, but by character and heart? What if we looked at someone not for how loud they are, but for how deeply they care? I believe we'd discover a kind of beauty that's more lasting than charm, more meaningful than performance. We'd discover that the light we've been searching for, the light we think only shines from those in the spotlight, has been right beside us, quietly burning, waiting to be seen. So let us not walk past these souls. Let us not dismiss the ones who rarely speak but always care. Let us remember that light doesn't need attention to shine, and the brightest flames are often found in the most unexpected places. True worth is not worn on the face but spoken through actions. It's easy to forget that in a world so fixated on appearances, we're constantly surrounded by messages telling us what beauty looks like, what success looks like, what confidence looks like. Everything is packaged, filtered, and shared in neat little images, convincing us that value is something we can see, something we can measure with our eyes. But the truth is, real worth can't be captured in a photo. It doesn't live on the surface. It lives in the choices we make, in the way we treat others, in the kind of person we become when no one is watching. We've all met people who look the part, who seem to have it all together, who walk with ease, speak with charm, and draw attention without effort. And sometimes, yes, those people are kind and genuine, but sometimes what we see isn't the full picture. Sometimes behind a perfect face is a heart that has forgotten how to care. And on the other hand, sometimes behind a face we might not notice right away is a soul that holds everything we're searching for: honesty, loyalty, warmth. That's why actions matter so much more than appearances. Because looks can fade. They change with time, with circumstance, with the lighting in a room. But how someone treats others, that's what stays. That's what tells us who they are. You can't fake kindness, not the real kind. You can't pretend to care day after day when no one is clapping for you unless that care is real. And when someone chooses to show up for others, when they offer help without being asked, when they give without expecting anything back, that's when we see their true worth. And sometimes it's the people we least expect who do the most meaningful things, not because they're trying to prove something, not because they want to be noticed, but because it's who they are. They're the ones who make time for others even when their own time is limited. They're the ones who speak gently when anger would be easier, who offer forgiveness when holding a grudge would feel justified. These are the actions that define a person, not the shape of their features or the smoothness of their skin. It's especially important to remember this when we meet someone who's been judged unfairly, maybe because of how they look, maybe because they don't fit into the neat categories the world loves to use. It's easy to overlook them, easy to assume that someone who doesn't shine outwardly must not have much to offer. But that's where we go wrong, because so often those are the very people who carry the deepest wells of compassion. They've known what it feels like to be dismissed, and they would never wish that feeling on someone else. And in that quiet commitment to kindness, they prove something powerful. They prove that worth isn't something you can put on like a jacket. It's not something you inherit or buy or polish to perfection. It's something you build through the choices you make, through the promises you keep, through how you treat the people who can do nothing for you in return. We need to start seeing each other for who we are beneath the surface. We need to ask different questions, not what do they look like, but how do they treat people. Not are they impressive, but are they kind? Are they honest? Do they lift others up? Because those answers tell us far more than appearances ever could. It takes strength to live with integrity when you're being overlooked. It takes heart to keep giving when recognition never comes. But in those small, consistent acts of goodness, that's where true value is found. That's where the light lives, not in the reflection in the mirror, but in the reflection of our choices on the people around us. So let us stop looking for worth in faces. Let us look for it in footsteps, in the path someone walks, in the impact they leave behind. Because beauty may catch our attention, but character is what keeps us. And when everything else fades, it's the actions that remain. It's how someone made us feel, how they stood by us, how they gave of themselves when they had every reason to hold back. And that is where true worth lives. The most powerful transformation is when rejection becomes strength. It doesn't happen all at once. At first, rejection just feels like pain, like being pushed away, like hearing the word no, not just to a request, but to your very presence. Like the quiet message that you're not wanted, not enough, not right. And when that message comes again and again through looks, through silence, through the absence of kindness, it starts to echo inside you. You start to believe it. That's the part no one talks about. The slow way rejection sinks into someone's bones, how it starts to shape the way they move through the world. But even in that place of hurt, something begins. Something small, the tiniest spark of defiance, the quiet question, what if I am more than they see? That's where transformation begins, not in the moment someone hurts you, but in the moment you decide not to stay hurt forever. It's not about pretending it didn't happen. It's about saying, yes, it happened, but it's not the end of me. Turning rejection into strength doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting the memory own you. It means taking every unkind word, every dismissal, every door that was shut in your face, and deciding that those things don't get to define who you are. It's one of the hardest things a person can do, to keep walking when the world tells you to stop, to keep showing up when it feels like no one wants you there. But when you do, something inside you changes. You become someone who cannot be broken so easily. You become someone who carries themselves with quiet resilience. And here's what's truly powerful. The same people who were once overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel small often become the ones who lift others up, because they know what it's like to be left out. They know how much a small act of kindness can mean. They know that rejection doesn't have to turn into bitterness. It can become purpose. It can become compassion. It can become a reason to make sure no one else feels the way they once did. When rejection becomes strength, it stops being a wound and becomes a foundation, a place to build from, a place where someone discovers who they really are, away from the noise of other people's opinions. It's quiet work, done in the background, often unseen. But it's what makes a person truly powerful. Not the power to control or impress, but the power to rise, to keep loving, to keep trying, to become a light, even after being kept in the dark. Sometimes the strongest people in the room are not the ones who talk the most or shine the brightest. They're the ones who have been broken before but still stand tall, the ones who carry the memory of every no they've heard and yet still say yes to life, to hope, to others. And that kind of strength doesn't need recognition. It doesn't need applause. It speaks for itself in how it survives, in how it chooses peace over anger, grace over pride. We all carry moments of rejection, moments where we felt like we didn't belong, but those moments don't have to remain our story. They can become the turning point, the part where we chose to rise anyway, where we took all the things meant to silence us and turned them into something steady, something solid. That's when rejection loses its power, not when we forget it, but when we grow beyond it. And that transformation, that quiet, uncelebrated transformation, is more powerful than anything the world could ever give us, because it means we found strength not from praise, but from within. It means we learned how to stand when no one offered us a hand. It means we refused to let someone else's opinion become our identity. So when you feel overlooked, when you feel like your presence doesn't matter, remember this: rejection is not the final chapter. It's just a pause, a silence waiting to be filled by your next step forward. And the greatest strength is not in never being rejected, but in choosing to rise after you have been. Thank you for walking with me through these stories of unseen strength, quiet kindness, and true worth. May we all learn to look deeper, judge slower, and honor the light that lives in even the most ignored souls, because the heart always speaks louder than appearance if we're willing to listen.